guys, welcome back to the new tribe. I have a super exciting guest today. This is Brooke Tara of the Universal Shamans of the New Tomorrow Church here in Texas. And Brooke, do you want to tell us a little bit about what your church is?
So USNT is a sacred medicine church. We host Bufo ceremonies. Bufo is our main medicine, so it's our sacrament of the church. But we started out with ayahuasca, also peyote, and then, going to Bufo. And so now we're strictly mainly Bufo church, but we do also offer peyote and ayahuasca from time to time.
Awesome. So I came upon you as part of my own journey that I've been on, and a cornerstone aspect of this process for myself has been the sacred medicines. And for me, that aspect of my experience began about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. Actually, no, I'm going to back up. My first experiences with any of the sacred medicines were psilocybin, and it was for medicinal purposes. I had MRSA, and my younger brother, who at the time was in his chemical engineering program, had previously had MRSA a breakout a couple of times, and coincidentally did mushrooms recreationally one weekend during his outbreak and saw a tremendous change in his healing process. Just like even his doctor was shocked to see how quickly he had healed. So then about a year later, when I picked it up from him, he said, okay, we have to try and see if the mushrooms really do help heal the infection. So my first experience with any plant medicine was to physically use it as medicine for my body. And it blew my mind after having the experience and seeing how it really did heal my infection, but also the aspect of the psychological experience.
Right.
Then many years later, actually this was probably about 10 years ago, and many years later I came back to the medicines during the thick of my dark night of the soul kind of thing, where I was hitting rock bottom and really reaching out and looking for whatever modalities the universe had for me, and came back to psilocybin, and then was invited to go to Costa Rica and sit with ayahuasca for 2 nights, and then a month later was then again invited to experience Bufo, and that was 2 years ago. And Bufo has been such a huge component of the last couple years of my life, even the fact that I had only sat with the medicine 2 times until recently. And those 2 experiences just set me on a trajectory of just transforming my faith. And having grown up in the Mormon church, which is a very stringent religion, I had such a strained and difficult relationship with my faith and with God. And I struggled to figure out how to make sense of that moving forward, because I was shown a very, very specific personality of God, and that didn't sit well with me. But I felt like after having Bufo, I was able to really reconnect with my faith from a totally different perspective, because then I was able to define my relationship and my concept of God for myself rather than through any type of church. So this is a quick rundown of the last few years, which led me to Bufo. And then recently, in the last several months, I've been feeling the call again towards the medicine. And after some wild coincidences, I reached out to the girl who had served me previously, who ended up being a student of Brooke's in the past. So you trained her to then go and serve, which I became one of her, what would you call
Some people call it clients, different names for it. But for us, with Bufo, the way it works with our USNT family is just like family. you know, 'cause once you have Bufo, there's no going back. So and there's no real others that can understand or comprehend. So for us, it's just family
because you're all connected.
Mm-hmm.
So I was served. I reached out to her and started to ask more information about, how that experience is of becoming a facilitator of the medicine, and she connected me with you. And then I was shocked to find that I had recently moved to your town.
Exactly, which is Huntsville, Texas. So that's not, I guess I wouldn't say it's not a normal town, but it's not a big city. It's not like Dallas or Houston. But the majority of our people, they come from, everywhere, really. The majority of our people fly in. And so, when she called that night and said that you were here in Huntsville, I said, Texas?
She said, are you sure not Huntsville, Alabama?
Right. It was just, so crazy. And then, but a lot of people don't realize, that synchronicity is the language of Bufo. So immediately I knew that there was, a bigger purpose, a bigger reason that the medicine had called you here to this town. So my ears perked up. And I said, okay, I'm paying attention.
And for clarity, I moved here last year unexpectedly. I was in a very wide open space, which I had intentionally created. I knew that where I was living in Plano was not the correct place, so I just kind of peeled everything away and didn't choose. I didn't make a decision of where I was going to land next. I set the kids and I up in a way that we had a home base and we had a plan, and we were open to following that plan to let it lead us to where our next home was. And that ended up being Huntsville. And then it was not for 4 or 5 months that I even found out that you were here. And so when you started to explain to me the synchronistic aspect of the medicine, which I'd already experienced, but I didn't have the verbal concept to attach to what I had been experiencing, I was like, oh, this all makes so much more sense to me now. Okay, so how in the world did you end up running a sacred medicine church in a small town in Texas?
So, I started out as a teacher. I mean, that's why I went, to college. I got my bachelor's, etc. I started teaching, and around 2007, 2008, spirit really started moving in my life. Just to kind of fast forward a bit into that, I went to a CU5 meeting, which is Dr. Stephen Greer runs, and basically was CU5 stands for close contact of a fifth kind, I believe. So it's basically going out with others to make contact consciously through the collective. And so I went to the first one they had in Houston, and at that point I met David, and David Dale was his name, or is his name. We're so close. And anyhow, so he and I, we were the only ones that walked out to where these lights were, flashing out in the woods. And when we were walking back, he stopped me and he said, what's your name? And I said, Brooke. He said, well, my name's David Dale, but you can call me Maestro because I'm going to be your teacher. And I said, okay. What are you going to teach me? How to make contact? I didn't know. And, he said, oh, there's a lot of things. And the next thing I know, literally the next day, he came over and started teaching me about the medicine, which I had no idea why, at the time. But, the things that started flowing and it was kind of like connecting the dots in my life, I guess you could say, that had led me up to that point. And so then it was, time to basically start sitting with the medicine directly with him. So we did that, and then from that...
Which medicines were this at that time?
Ayahuasca. Yeah, so I started working with him with ayahuasca, and basically all of the CU5 events after that first one, there was never contact made after the first one. The first time it was brief, but it was, powerful and beautiful, and that's where I met David. All of the ones I attended after, he did not attend, and we never made contact. And yet all of these things were kind of growing. This spiritual awareness really was growing, with him and I in that way. And so we just kind of broke off from that group and, called ourselves Universal. That's where the Universals, with the AGs, Universal Shamans of the New Tomorrow, because he worked with medicine. And so anyhow, so that's where the actual name came from. And that's where, the group first kind of started, like the first people that were interested were the ones, that had made contact with us the very first time. So we continued on with USNT. I was getting Airbnbs in order to, host ceremonies, and one thing led to another with that. And, within that first year or so, I was able to, not even able really, just kind of forced to, leave my job and get land. That way we could move out, and and it all kind of just
snowballed.
Yeah, snowballed, from there. But a lot of people ask me different questions, about the formation of the church and how this and how do you do that, and honest to God, it was never me. It was never like I don't know how to go about it, at all. Really, it's just it was so spirit made. When I tried to continue working with children, it just cut off every aspect of it. The first place we moved was Porter. There were no teaching jobs. They were all kind of kept in the family. So it was so odd. So, but as I'm trying to find a teaching job, I have all of these different shamans calling, wanting to come in from Peru and Brazil and Colombia. So, I was busy setting them up, but also still trying to find work, and it just balanced each other out, the situation.
And the universe told you, you're going to teach, just not kids anymore.
Exactly, yeah.
So when you met David, did you previously have any experiences with medicines, or this is like your crash course?
I had, so LSD when I was 14 once. I remember that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny because that's one of the main questions, I ask, because it's your first sacred medicine, to people. I guess for whatever reason, people think I'm, asking about psychedelics, which I'm not at all, because I don't, personally put the sacred medicines in that class. But a lot of people will say, oh, I had LSD, I had, this, that, and the other, and then I have to get specific about sacred medicine. So, but no, so my only real experience was, the one time at 14 years old with LSD, but that was obviously nothing compared to what I work with now.
Yeah.
And the other one, though, was Salvia divorium. And so that was very brief, but it was very consuming. I wanted to figure it out. I wanted to understand it, So, but that was my last real experience with anything along those lines or anywhere near the nature of these medicines.
So you could say that the medicine came to you.
Yeah, definitely. In a big way.
And how long have you been running the church now?
10 years.
After I had my first Bufo experience, which was described to me as like a textbook ego death. Laid back, went to a void, came back laughing like, oh my gosh, okay, it makes sense now. But then in my integration period after this, I wanted to know everything that I could know about this medicine, which, as you know, there's not a lot of information about. So what I was able to find and learn was that, which, by the way, when I first went into this medicine, all I knew was that it was frog venom. My girlfriend called me and said, hey, would you be interested in having the Bufo ceremony? And I said, what's that? And she said, frog venom. And I'm like, say less. Okay, let's do it. And so if you look online and you try to research, there's very, very little information about this medicine. And from the psychedelic perspective community, there is a little bit of information about 5-MeO-DMT and comparing it to synthetic DMT. So, can you give us a little more information or background from your understanding of this medicine?
So, Bufo is basically the name of the toad. So, Bufo being the toad, it lives in the Sonora Desert. It's also referred to a lot as the Colorado River toad, although there are none in Colorado. They're, mainly in the Sonora Desert, in, some parts of the U.S., but the main places in the Sonora in Mexico. So, which is, I would say, northern central Mexico. And
yeah, the Sonoran Desert spans across the border into
right.
the southern U.S., so northern Mexico.
Right, correct. And so in that understanding, so these toads are, they're big, they're species. Their species basically survive, not the Bufo areas, but Bufo, I forget the other actual name of it, but survived the Ice Age, basically, by going underground. So these toads live underground in the Sonora for 9 months out of the year, and it's usually the summertime whenever they come out, and they come out for 3 months, breed, have babies, etc., and continue on. But it's during those 3 months that the medicine's harvested. Mm-hmm. So it's funny too that you mentioned, that it was frog venom. Mm-hmm. So it's not, it's toad venom, but but it's so funny because we have had quite a few people that come for combo. Mm-hmm. So combo is the frog venom. Uh-huh. Now again, we're Bufo, we're the toad venom, and combo is a frog venom. But
combo is definitely a venom. I have had combo as well, and there's nothing that'll detox you like combo. Nothing
at all. But it's just so funny because when people have shown up before, for combo,
yeah,
and I say, well, that's a different thing. That's a frog venom. We're toad venom, but.
And you're like, you can have Bufo though.
Oh yeah, and I do. They always end up taking it, but I always tell them right off the bat, it is your lucky day.
Yeah.
Because if you came for combo and you get Bufo,
much gentler.
Yeah, you're doing really good. So in that understanding that it is a toad venom. Also, the lack of information out there is the prophecy, that which is what our church is based on. So, and that understanding of the way the prophecy works, it was a little over 500 years ago when the Spanish conquistadors came over. It was 1521, and they hid the knowledge. The indigenous hid the knowledge of Bufo, and for that 500 years, and then so now, with 2021, I believe it's August 17th of 21, that that prophecy became fulfilled. And so now people are seeing this medicine come back, but they're also thinking that it has no tradition, no culture behind it. When it does, it was just hidden for 500 years.
Okay, share a little on the prophecy, because I had never heard of it. Even in my research, I'd never heard of the prophecy, which is super common amongst most indigenous cultures, particularly in South America. And so explain what the prophecy is and where Bufo lands within this prophecy.
Okay, so, first off, the prophecy is multifaceted. It's called the Eagle and Condor prophecy. So, in that understanding, it's multifaceted. So, it really covers a lot of different things, but it's all, based on this 500-year period. Medicine-wise, I'll just say the prophecy out loud, and then I'll say it with the commentation, I guess you could say. So the prophecy says, when the eagle of the north flies together again in the same sky with the condor of the south, then the spirit of the land will reawaken. And so in that understanding, when they're speaking of the eagle from the north, that's the medicine of the north representing peyote. Okay, and then the condor of the south would be representing ayahuasca, okay, from South America. So when the two, ayahuasca and peyote, fly together again in the same sky where it's, where the north and south are connected and united, like we were just discussing, is the Sonora Desert. And so it says, when the two fly together again in the same skies, and the spirit of the land will reawaken. And so the place the sky is shared is the Sonora Desert, and the spirit of the land is Bufo, under the ground for 9 months out of the year. And so basically that's the prophecy, the bigger understanding with Bufo, and why the traditions were, kept secret or kept hidden for so long, and why it doesn't have any information behind it. Again, it just is what we're doing now, is trying to bring that the sacred knowledge of Bufo back to the forefront of understanding it.
Humanity is ready for it again.
Oh yeah. We've been ready, I think. But yeah.
So when you explained this prophecy to me, it connected so many dots in my mind, because Bufo, having had ayahuasca myself, and I haven't had peyote yet, but I look forward to the next peyote ceremony that you host and being able to come participate in that. But having had ayahuasca and Bufo, and understanding the stark contrast in what those experiences provide, it made so much sense to hear the prophecy, particularly from this perspective, because these ancestral medicines that we have used ceremoniously for hundreds and thousands of years are very, very different from the so-called new medicine, because Bufo was only discovered in the 80s, correct?
I believe in the 70s.
Okay.
They say that it was. That's, the Albert Most pamphlet, which I have, you can look at. But it's, it's almost so ridiculous, it's so far-fetched. And, I mean, it's...
That he somehow isolated the component. He was studying plants that had DMT, and I don't know how I did read about this, and how he somehow made the connection with DMT being in the toad venom, and then so he goes out and collects it and smokes it. But my question was, how did he know this process? How would he have known to even do that? When you're studying a venom without some sort of traditional knowledge of how to safely handle the substance.
Right. And then when you get more into the nitty gritty, like Albert Most wasn't his real name. All of these. I know on the Hamilton Pharmacopoeia, there was a whole segment on that, and then Hamilton had to go back and apologize for the misinformation, and it's just misinformation. I mean, to me, anything that anything that you hear about Bufo that doesn't resonate, mainly, especially for people who've had Bufo, if it doesn't resonate, it's not true.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's often a really, really good guidepost for anything. Most people from a spiritual perspective especially will say, take what resonates and leave the rest. Because everything has to be said on a spectrum of frequencies for the most people to be able to receive the message.
Right.
And so one part of the message may resonate, but the rest may not. And so maybe the reason that this circumstance that's questionable and kind of vague and weird with this Albert Most guy, which was, like you said, his pseudonym, maybe that was just how things were able to start getting into the mainstream, right? It kind of came through the early psychedelic community of looking for this specific component, the God molecule, right? Which is what DMT is. So what is the difference to your understanding of DMT and 5-MeO-DMT?
Well, so DMT would be the spirit molecule,
okay,
right? And then, Bufo, or, well, I guess, really when they dissect it to the point of calling it a molecule, to me, it's just, it's just, I don't know, that bothers me in a way. But when they're calling it a molecule, they're usually referring to the synthetic version. So the DMT would be what they would call the spirit molecule, and the 5-MeO-DMT, which is what is found in Bufo, would be considered the God molecule.
Okay.
Now, when you look at the sacred medicines and how our ancestors named them for the consciousness that you take in, right? So literally ingesting the consciousness of these sacred medicines, they named the medicines for the consciousness. So that way you were aware of who you were actually taking in. So with the idea of, your body being like a vehicle, and then your consciousness being the driver of the vehicle, well, whenever you take one of these medicines, you're now in the passenger seat or back seat, and the consciousness of the medicine is driving. So in that understanding, our ancestors named, for instance, the mushrooms Niños Santos, which means holy little children. So you can understand if you have some mushrooms, you're going to go out, the colors are going to be brighter, you're going to laugh and giggle, maybe chase a butterfly. As long as you're not taking like a whole lot, you know what I mean?
If you take a hero's dose, it's a different story.
Right, that would be a different story. But you can see where the consciousness that you're ingesting is literally a holy little child. And
which is why, to this point, though, it's really important to acknowledge why microdosing mushrooms people find so beneficial, because they're taking in the spirit of a lighter consciousness, a lighter awareness, and they're able to enjoy themselves. And because it is a psychosomatic medicine, it has a physical impact on our body and our brain. And so this spirit is physically working through us by repairing and stimulating new neural pathway connections in our brain, which we're consciously experiencing this elevation from. And one of my favorite things about all of the medicines is the way that science is starting to connect the benefits that our ancestors have always known.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so go on to the rest of them.
Okay, so I get the mushrooms, the Niños Santos. The ayahuasca would be Abuelita, the grandmother, with the feminine, and then Abuelito, the grandfather, that would be peyote. So peyote, the grandfather, also Wachuma, with San Pedro. So these masculine, which is easy to remember because masculine. That's how I remember. And so San Pedro, peyote, would be the masculine, the grandfather. Ayahuasca, Abuelita, the grandmother. The mushrooms, the Niños Santos, holy little children, and then Bufo would be Dios, which is God consciousness. So you can understand how the different experience with, but also understanding that relation between what they call the God molecule as 5-MeO-DMT, and then what our ancestors named the, God consciousness of Bufo Alberia. So, so it's the understanding is we're dealing with God, or the divine within us, so, but also with our church and what we are doing, we've mended our ways, with understanding the way the medicines work and why they've been working for us in these ways. And so in that understanding with peyote, the traditions that are peyote are very much what we're bringing back to Bufo, because they're from that same area. And so having that connection and learning everything that we've learned, through the peyote traditions and ways, and bringing that to Bufo, we've learned how to work with people who are needing to heal, past childhood traumas. Rather than taking Niños Santos, they can still take, the medicine, but we have south ceremonies, so we keep our focus in the south, which is the direction of the south is the children, and so we bring in that element, and then same with the west for the abuelita, the grandmother, ayahuasca, and then the east for the abuelito, grandfather, peyote. So we're still able to work with these with these ways through Bufo to cover the different healing aspects of the other medicines, the other sacred, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so essentially through the physical elements in your ceremony space and utilizing those energies, you can almost channel, like in the South ceremony, you would channel the energy of the Santos Niños through Bufo.
Not so much. Not so much channeling the other, energies of the medicines themselves.
But what the medicines connect to and represent?
Yeah. So right. So the South, when we put our direction or our focus in that direction, for a Bufo ceremony, then it's very much so focused on healing that inner child.
Yeah.
And then the same with the West for the feminine, and then the East for the masculine. And then the North would be ancestral, which is, spirit. And so with working with these elements, we can, do a lot of more so focus healing for these particular areas of life when it's needed. So also when people come just for a group ceremony, they can initiate their own healing in that direction by sitting in a direction where they understand. So we review that a little bit before we actually go into ceremony. So if anybody wants to sit in one of those areas, they can kind of focus that energy. Not that it will heal the same way as the other medicines would, but for that energy in that direction to kind of be focused in upon. And so for the healing aspect of the medicine to go into that main area and let that work unfold, for that.
I can attest to that because I've been in ceremony with you in both the South and in the West. And though you always explain it, it's not where my mind, I'm so focused on my intention going in. It hadn't really taken root of which direction had which representation yet. And I just sort of naturally ended up in those spaces where you were like, okay, pick where you're going to be. And then reflecting after ceremony of the experiences that I had or the thoughts and feelings that came through during them, and you're like, oh yeah, that's because you were in the South. Oh yeah, that's because you were in the West.
Right. Yeah, big time. And I'm just now remembering too with the last one we had, which was more the laid back one, which was you were in the South. And those little sour candies.
Oh yeah.
Which I'm just remembering right now, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. It's always so that part never gets old with Bufo. I'm always just as shocked, with these little nuances of information, the way that the medicine works with the elements. It's so powerful,
It's amazing.
It is.
And I can imagine throughout a 10-year experience and relationship with this medicine that you've seen some really incredible things that have happened. I know just in the last few months you've shared a few with me throughout, shortly after we've had ceremonies together, and then something synchronistic will happen on your end and you're like, look at this.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing.
Yeah, never gets old.
Now that we have a little bit of an understanding about what Bufo is and where it comes from, what can we expect going into a Bufo ceremony? And I know that's sort of a loaded question because you never really can tell.
Right. No, and you never can tell. And that's one thing. It's funny because, the way you asked, because what I always tell people is do your best not to expect anything. Don't.
That's why I hesitate to even ask the question, because I know that you're not going to want to paint too much of a picture there. But I will share about my first experience, which I believe it was what it was because I had no knowledge. I had no idea what to expect out of this experience. I just knew that when I was invited to sit with the medicine, which I talk a lot about human design, I talk about on the podcast, for my personal strategy as a projector, and yours as well, Brooke's also a projector, we are designed to wait for the invitation, for something to come to us and be invited into something energetically tends to be much more fluid and aligned of an experience than when we insert ourselves or initiate something. I don't know about you, but I know that when I learned my human design and I learned that made all these little pieces fall into place of things that made so much sense. And I kind of understood that, but I didn't really until I learned my human design. But anyway, I digress. So I was invited to sit with the medicine, and it felt like it resonated. There was zero part of me that had any retraction from it. And so I knew nothing other than it was toad venom. And I was like, okay, let's go. So when I was served and Ashley came to my house to serve me in a private ceremony, I really appreciated the ceremonial aspect of it because I do approach the medicines as sacred. I have a very holistic background. Everything in my life growing up was herbs and the way that we were treated, and everything's like very natural and holistic. And so the transition into the space of sacred medicines made so much sense for me already because I already have such a connection to the medicinal gifts of the earth. And so it's not difficult to understand that there are gifts from the earth that have an extremely powerful effect. And so this was about a month after ayahuasca. So I was still like working my way down from my ayahuasca journeys and went in completely blind. And I remember inhaling the vapors and having a moment where I was looking at her face thinking, okay, I wonder how long this is going to take, right? Because ayahuasca, it's like you could be sitting there for 2 hours waiting for the medicine to take hold, and other things, it's all a different amount of time. And before I could even finish that thought, I started to see the light coming through the window like fractal, and her face kind of started to pixelate. And that was the moment where I just surrendered to it. My last conscious thought was, okay, if this kills me, it's already done. Like, I've already taken it, and if I die, I die. There is nothing I can do. And I think that surrendering in that thought allowed me to just release, like, to the medicine. And then I didn't have any experiences because I didn't exist anymore for a moment. But then I came back, and it was like my brain was filtering what my consciousness had experienced. And as my brain was filtering it in, then a picture began to develop in my mind of being in this space outside of everything. And I could see this like spherical sort of entity in front of me, and it was moving so fast, and it had light inside of it, and it was just, I knew that it was everything. It was all of time and space inside of this little like donut almost, and it was all like it was all happening at the same time. It was like I could see every time of the Earth's existence and before and after, and just all of it at one time. And I was outside of it in this void, and I was a frequency. I was a hum, and everything I was witnessing was a hum. And so when I came back to my body consciousness, I could still hear that hum. And I just started laughing, and I was like, oh my gosh, It's always everything all the time. And the most simple concept that my brain was able to like sift all of the information of my consciousness becoming connected to the space of like one consciousness. All of the knowledge that can possibly be is in that space, and we are part of that space. And so I came back, and my brain is trying to, I always explain it's like your phone can pull information from the internet, but it can't hold all of the information in the internet. And that's kind of what my integration felt like. It was like I had all these new web browsers open, and my brain was just switching between them all, but it couldn't hold and process all of that information at one time. And so that was a pretty big integration for me. But when it distilled everything down to the simplest concept, I was like, nothing matters. Nothing matters except what we choose for to matter, because as much as something is, it also is not. And as much as something is important, it is also not important. And I know that sounds insane to some people, but gosh, the burden that was lifted off of me in that moment of realizing I stress about everything. And you know, especially as a mom of 3, I then triple time my stress and the things that I tell myself I have to worry about. But then this understanding that so much of what I'm choosing to matter is not actually what really matters. What is really going to matter at the end of this life? What's really going to matter on the other side of it? And so when I say that Bufo has had a huge impact on all of the decisions and changes and choices that have been made over the last couple years of my life, it has had a tremendous impact because it's helped me move with such an intention of looking far beyond the moment of, you know, this house is a mess and this needs to be done and I got to go like take care of these things and run these errands, and things that we just run on the wheel in our mind all day long. Is like, it always gets done. It'll always get done. It's okay. And I was able to just really start releasing a lot of the pressure that I put on myself and become extremely intentional with my interactions with other people, especially with my children. And so when you started telling me, you're like, Bufo helped you become a more like genuine version of yourself. You're more you than you were before Bufo. So I always love sharing that experience with people because it was like, I remember telling Ashley, I was like, I feel like in 30 minutes I've surpassed what 10 years of therapy could have maybe done for me.
At least, yeah. Yeah, I know. It's crazy that way. I mean, Bufo is, the most common thing that people say after Bufo, after the experience, is no words, you know? And that's really the truth, because, I mean, even if, I find it funny that everyone that's ever had Bufo, we all completely agree that there's no words for it, no language, not even a vocabulary yet we got like people writing books and like all these, and I mean, here we are talking about it. This whole podcast is about Bufo. Yeah. And yet there's literally no words. You know, there's no words in the human language to express, convey from my awareness to your awareness what that experience is. Right. Or to awareness, period. Because the thing is with everything else, we have the ability to at least imagine prior to taking it. Yeah. That's why I tell people no expectations. Like don't go watch something about it. Don't go, because your mind literally, until you have Bufo, your mind cannot fathom it.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't reached that far out.
Well, because it opens your mind to a realm that until your mind is open to it, you can't. It's like walking into a house and you stand outside of the door, or walking up to a house and you stand outside the door and you can't assume what it's going to look like inside. You can never, until the door is open and you see the rooms, you can paint a picture and it'll never match.
Right. Yeah, like that. But when I think of it like that, I think of how a Bufo house. If I open the door of a Bufo house, I would just fall through. I don't know.
It wouldn't even exist.
It wouldn't even have floors. It's just but that shocking.
Yeah.
Of a whoa, I really could not have imagined. And that's also the beauty of it is because it doesn't matter. I mean, people can go out there and read all this stuff and watch all these things and then come with these expectations. It still doesn't matter because the actual experience will so beyond surpass
expectation every time.
Yeah, that's why I'm I've got the best job because
I know you get surprised every day,
every single day, and it's it's such a beautiful thing to have people even if it's not their first time. First time, it's always my favorite to get to share that experience with somebody, but also for the first timers who when they come back and no one thinks that they can go nearly as deep as they went the last time, but then it's a billion times more and completely different. So I mean it's the literal definition of infinite.
Well, it, like you explained, it is God consciousness. And I think the fascination with humans trying to explain God to one another and creating religion, and we're not even going to talk about the control aspect of all that, but the one thing that I think that all humans across all time and all iterations of humanity is we speak where we come from. We have this, just like when someone is adopted and they have no connection and no understanding of their lineage, it's not necessarily looking for your family, but just to know where you come from. And we have that on the soul level, and Bufo allows us to connect to the space of where we come from. And that can be a really dangerous thing in a world of extreme control and power structures. And so it makes perfect sense to me why this particular medicine has been hidden and has been isolated away from us for so long. And then for anyone who pays any sort of attention to the astrological goings on in the sky, we're in this very, very unique period in time in human history in general, according to what's going on in the sky. We're experiencing some pretty massive transitions and types of transitions and changes that only happen every few hundred years or so. And we're just in this moment in time where a lot of them are happening at once, which I keep saying, everything just feels so different. And right now, I'm not going to get into explaining what they are, but there's been a lot, we're January 26th today. And so there's been a lot happening in recent times. And I think that you're seeing the medicine work with these energies of the astrology and the cosmos shifting and changing, right? Because you've been mentioning to me how people are coming to the medicine in totally different ways than you've seen.
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
it's been very different. I mean, it's one big thing that's been, I feel, changed with Bufo is more recently is, I feel the pull away from understanding of our concept of healing,
Yeah.
and allowing ayahuasca to really take that in. That's what ayahuasca does so well. She takes us into the trauma and she has us look at it, and that's a beautiful thing. I mean, if it weren't for ayahuasca, I wouldn't be here right now. So I love that medicine very much.
Yeah.
She's not my medicine, but I love her very much.
Yeah.
And so the direction, though, more so with Bufo, I feel is pushing us more into a way of understanding, that it's up to us. Like, this is heaven, this idea of, of living out this life in a good way so we can get to heaven. Like, that's just so elementary. I mean, it doesn't even really register, but the understanding of, you being a creator, and your reality is literally always been created by you. And in that understanding, I mean, if you think about it, when you go into Bufo, that is literally what Bufo is showing you. That you have the divine, ability and capabilities to create anything within you. And so in that understanding, what do you want heaven to be? Because it, you have everything. It's all malleable. Everything, your own, imagination would be your limitation, So it's in that way. I feel like Bufo is wanting that focus to be more so realized, to know that that first off, that heaven on earth is possible, and that we're the one. It's up to us. We're the ones creating it. So I feel, I don't know what it was, the switch. At first I was thinking it was in the actual new year, but I feel more so it was on the solstice. Things started really switching in that direction with Bufo.
I think so. This month, the fact that it's only 3, not even 4 weeks into this month, and I think back of coming here just a few weeks ago, and we have the women's ceremony, and I'm like, that feels like a lifetime ago already. And I don't know if it's the Bufo or just like the fact that right now everything is happening. We just had the inauguration. So for better or worse, things are happening in our external world that are changing our reality regardless. There's no control. There's no resisting it. It's just happening in that part of life. But then also when we're working with these medicines and seeing those changes reflected internally as well, it's been big. It's big time. I know that for me personally, throughout my life, I know that we all, like human nature, we seek God and we fear death, right? Like, those are two of our just deeply embedded programming in our brain of aspects that are going to influence the way we navigate this life, right? And for me, I first developed the fear of death when I was probably, I would say 10 or 11, I want to say. I had a great uncle who had gotten brain cancer. And they lived out of state, so we didn't see them too frequently. But I remember having seen my aunt and uncle one summer, and then maybe it was a year later we saw them again, and in that time he had been diagnosed. And just since the diagnosis, the way that he deteriorated and the way that he changed, and then coming and seeing him again, and that was the last time I saw him as, a young kid, that was the first time I realized, like, oh, your body can turn on you. And so I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of external violence in the community, in the home. There was just a lot of turmoil. And so my mind and concept of death and danger was always external. You can protect yourself, from certain situations. And then, like, my mind was open to a whole new version of fearing death at that age. And it's something that I think it's part of my karma in this life or something, is to make peace with the concept of death, because then I had my kids, and it was not so much I was afraid of dying, but I was afraid of leaving them. And going through different experiences throughout life, having traumas where you dissociate and all of that, like, you get this callous view towards death where you almost like mock it a little. And then going down my own path toward healing or whatever it was I needed to do to find peace. I think, we call it healing, but really we're all just looking for peace. And Bufo played such a huge role in that. It totally reframed my understanding of death and my relationship with the idea, because, we all have to face it at some point, yeah? And so it reframed my entire relationship and has helped me so much in processing the fear that I've carried for so many years, which, I faced death when I had my pulmonary embolism. It's just something that has always come up to me. And so it's been really prominent in more of my recent sessions with sitting with the medicine. It's like I can almost feel it yo-yoing me between life and death, but then because my consciousness is still there, it's like I know, like, I'm not actually dying, but I also know that I am.
Yeah. It makes you think too, because like one of the deepest understandings that I know for me I've had with Bufo is the understanding that you are never born and you'll never die. As far as within your experience, that will never happen. And so, and if you think of it, like, of all life experience, we don't remember being born. You don't have any stories of people really, you've got the near-death experiences, all this, but there is no one to actually explain, and so, but with Bufo, you understand that you go back to, right, and source is steady there, always you, that you is never born, that you will never die, that you doesn't have a storyline or a name, it's just source connecting you, but you identify with it very well, like, it's very, like, that's just an absolute knowing in Bufo, and forgive me because I also know that, even though I say all this, out loud, when you really think about it, somebody popping in and listening to this, it doesn't make any sense really, unless they've had Bufo, but that you go back to in Bufo is that infinite source you. And so knowing that forever constant you is always there, there is so much peace. Like, that's kind of where I see that, that peace with any, really any thoughts of the future whatsoever, because, that constant me, I know is not going anywhere, and is infinite. And so it's just ever growing and ever aware of us and ever aware of, of what we're doing. So it's just so weird when you try to figure it out up here. I tell people all the time, like, after Bufo, don't get this involved.
Keep your head out of it.
Yeah.
Don't work it over in your mind.
And it's just so true. You'll never figure it out. You can't figure it out.
But isn't that kind of the point? Because we're here and we experience life until we transform life, and then we go through these different iterations. You always talk about the way that Bufo works in spherical time. We imagine the world to be very linear. You're born, you live, XYZ happens throughout your life, then you die. But with the understanding of Bufo, and I think that this is becoming a more commonly accepted concept as well, because quantum science is exploding and people are resonating so much with what quantum science is saying, because it is tapping into the eternal aspect of ourselves, which prior to this point in time, we have all just been taught, you're born, you live, you die, and hopefully you don't screw up too bad, because then you end up in heaven or hell, and welcome to your eternity. The spherical aspect of it, I think, is one of my, I find it most fascinating and intriguing. And I
started to develop this idea about death as you're describing it. And I started to develop that belief system, or I don't even know if I want to call it a belief system, but this concept of death and what happens to our awareness, what's our experience after death. And then coming into Bufo, and then especially, you know, being able to talk with you, and you have so much experience, and you've witnessed this medicine work in so many ways. It was like that was the medicine working before. This is a year and a half before I ever sat with the medicine the first time. But I was learning through it. My mind was open to what it had to show me a little further down the linear path.
Wow, yeah. No, that makes perfect sense.
Doesn't really?
No, it does. It does. I wasn't sure where you were going with it. I was just kind of intrigued by because that is a lot of the way I feel like Bufo makes you think. But then when you let me know,
I know I'm a rambler.
No, but it's so important because you know that understanding of being able to, and it's one again, it's frustrating because you can't see it until you actually experience Bufo. But once you do experience Bufo, now you have the ability to look in your past and be like, holy crap, that was Bufo, that was Bufo, that was Bufo. You know, so then the spherical time starts to make sense. You know, so it's in that understanding, it's so powerful that way. But yeah, the medicine works and complete spherical, you know, and laughs at us because we try our best to keep it linear. It's like, oh my God, you're missing the bigger point. The more fun idea here. But I feel like that's, you know, like, well, no one can argue this with me. I swear on my life, Bufo has the most hardcore personality. I mean, as far as, you know, sense of humor goes, you know, but his sense of humor is very much based on spherical time. So he's just, you know, he can make jokes like
decades before or after you're gonna get it.
Literally, like you can do that. It's so phenomenal, and it makes him so kind of quirky like that, you know. But that the way, you know, Bufo works within that spherical time, and then showing, you know, it's up to us through linear time is unreal, you know, but real, but unreal.
Yeah, you know? Reality gets a little bit mushier
and more
in that space. Yeah, well, I love it because as someone who has always struggled with the very rigid structure of reality as we are socially taught it, right? There's very specific ways to exist in the world. There are specific expectations. I mean, productivity is through the roof in our expectations of ourselves and one another from a worldly perspective, but really, like, to what end? And I think that's one thing that no matter what perspective we're viewing the way we choose to live life, what we are not taught is to what end? What is the purpose? Okay, you're running around and you're tidying all the things up and you've got your picture perfect clean house. But is this what makes you happy? Is this where you find your peace and your joy? Or is it by giving yourself a different type of nourishment that you get to decide? And so for me, my soul has always desired to live in different ways. Not saying that I don't like to keep a tidy house, but that's just an example of living within these concepts. You know, we're just taught these structured things that we're supposed to do. And that's the metric by which you are able to define if you're successful, if you're unsuccessful. I mean, how many people go to bed at the end of the day kind of beating themselves up a little bit because they don't feel like they've been productive enough that day? But maybe what you needed to be productive was something different than what our established expectation is. And so that's been one of the really big things for me, is really just working through the medicine and seeing reality in a more malleable way and understanding time and life and all of these things from a perspective where I have more ability to mold the reality that I want to be in. I just have to allow myself to get rid of the rigid structure that has been programmed into my mind and my understanding of what it's supposed to look like. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I'm so glad you brought it up too, because you really just now hit the nail on the head when you said, going into the program, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's exactly what it is. So it's like when you say, to what end, right? It's going to differ for each person because each person has their own program that they're running through, and their whole life is literally based on, one program that is, it can be like a broken record. You're just going, around and around and around, and your life just continues, same major picture show, but different people acting out, the same part, and like that. It's just a program that's just continuing to run that was, instilled in us as a child. But in that understanding, the program is, based on your subconscious. And so that subconscious that, if you go to do work with, like say Joe Dispenza, he talks about going in and reprogramming the subconscious. But all of these people have, like, the main situation, and that situation is how do we get into the subconscious to reprogram it. Well, that is Bufo.
Yeah.
You see?
It's a direct shot. It's like an arrow into it.
Literally, when you take Bufo, you go into your subconscious and you can reprogram the subconscious there. That's why I tell people, be really clear with your intention, because this is, very much so. I mean, if the industry understood what this medicine can do, my God, can you imagine?
Oh my gosh. I would fear for the frogs.
Exactly. Well, there it is. Exactly. But again, that's kind of the same idea too, is when we have this medicine, the sacred medicine that is literally giving us the opportunity to create heaven on earth, then once people really get away from the constant, like, oh, I'm gonna heal this, I'm gonna heal this, I'm gonna heal this. It goes back to the same thing you were saying. Well, okay, great. To what end? Yeah. Because it's become very much of a fad. You look around, everyone's doing this kind of healing and this kind of healing. Okay, great, but for what? Yeah. Like, I guess the greater question is, okay, what's gonna happen when everybody's all healed up?
Yeah. What does healing look like?
That's the idea. Like, let's get there.
Yeah.
And that is where I feel Bufo is mainly going into that realm of getting, the people who understand the power of this medicine to go into in order to create that, to create the now what, the heaven on earth that, that is so really simple. When you go into Bufo, it's all just so simple. It's just like, there it is. Like, well, why didn't I know this? But yeah, it's that feeling of, like, just wanting everyone to be able to experience that and understand that. And so, like, that's kind of, I guess, the greater goal that I feel that I personally want to go do with this medicine, is learning to work directly hands-on within my own subconscious to develop, ways for people to go in and really work on themselves and their aspects of how they see themselves, so they're not on this program of, like a hamster wheel.
Well, in my experience, yes. And in my experience, you drive such an important point into the intention. And I carry that in my own life, is I try to be very intentional with my interactions, and especially in making sure that I know to what end I am making choices and I'm doing things and I'm honoring myself first and foremost in that. And so then coming and having ceremonies with you
and you double down on be very intentional, like be very specific with your intention and understand what your intention is. So I have done that in these ceremonies, and I can say that the things that I've focused on intentionally, what I want to work on, what I want to release, and I'll share a little bit. My intention towards healing, which we know that we're really not healing anything. We're finding love for the life that we're in and for the self that we are in the life we're in. But ironically, we kind of have to go through that journey of seeking healing to realize we don't have to heal the perfection that this life already is. And so coming into these different ceremonies, I've been intentional about wanting to release the things that I've held on to. I don't need to heal them, but I need to let go of things, whether it's my body holding traumas, whether it's my mind holding traumas, whatever things that I'm white knuckle grasping that don't belong to me to keep their identities, labels, anything that is not serving my higher purpose to the end that I seek. That's been my intention. But with each ceremony, it's more specific, right? So when we had our ceremony that was just us girls, and I wanted to be in that feminine space, and that's the beauty of Bufo, right? I had said, I'm not going to have medicine again until it's in a all-female feminine space. And then not 3 days later, they're like, hey, we're going to do a women's only circle. And I was like, well, I guess I can't really deny it in this moment. And so moving with such a distinct intention, such as in that space, I wanted to really shed some layers of just scarring, I suppose, associated with my relationship with my mom, which by the end of that ceremony and the experience that we had there, and coming out of that ceremony with all of the women around the fire there with their hands on me, and you were all just like literally physically putting love into my body with just both of my hands were being held. And as I was releasing a lot of really deeply rooted traumatic energy that I was holding on to, it was being backfilled in real time by all of you putting this loving feminine energy into me, where that's where my traumas were associated. And I mean
and it was in the West.
And it was in the West.
Which is the women, the feminine, ayahuasca, the trauma, the healing.
And it was so incredible because after the previous time before that, I was like, oh, that was a big process. I don't think I'm ready for it yet. So I put my stipulation that it would only be in a feminine circle. And then Bufo was like, okay, let's go.
Right.
So with all of that being said, the power of intention, you get to see through this medicine in such a fast way, like instantly.
Yeah, that's why I always tell people get real precise.
Yeah,
because the more precise you are, the more you understand the power of the medicine, and that, you know, what I'm hoping people can, you know, understand,
take away.
Yeah, and why it's sacred, you know, why, like, you know, the why it's so needed right now.
Oh, know? Absolutely.
There's, again, that it just goes back to no words, no language, no vocabulary, because there's, you know, there's just no words of how much we need this medicine right now, you know. But at the same time, that's why the medicine's here. And so, you know, but with people coming in, and it's fun to watch, you know, the different people and the different lives that they live and gifts that they come and bring to the medicine.
Yeah.
You know, and the way Bufo interacts with that, and how it blows up these different gifts for these different people in order for them to, to go out and work with the medicine in their own specific way. So it's phenomenal to even be a part of it, just to watch it.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I've only had the one experience where you invited me to participate in someone else's private ceremony and guided me toward the different experience that it is to enter the medicine for another person versus entering the medicine for yourself. And then going into that space with that intention and with that perspective, and then going through the process that came out of that ceremony, I already had such respect and love for you for what you do, that you have truly devoted your life to this work. But now, having had even just one experience where I went into the medicine for another person, the purpose was the other person to hold space and to process energy on their behalf. And then the fact that you do this like daily, and that you hold this space and you do this work not just with people but also for them. And I see what a huge task that is, to go into the darkest parts of people's human experience and help them move through that. I mean, not to get into too much detail, but like the fact that my fingers, it felt like my fingertips were dying, like they were frostbitten and they were going to fall off. And then what he shared with me afterwards, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so I have so much respect and so much gratitude to you, for you have made a huge sacrifice in some ways by giving your life to serve this medicine and the people who seek it. And I'm just so grateful that I get the opportunity to learn from you and to share on our podcast here. I'm so happy that you have come on to talk, and I have so much love and so much respect and appreciation for what you're doing, because I think that as people continue this path towards healing and finding love for themselves, you just hold such a beautiful space in doing so.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank Bufo.
Yeah.
The medicine is incredible.
Well, and I do think it's important to clarify that for me, the way that I see it is, I am a version of my higher self embodied in this human vehicle, as are you. And then we all trace the family tree back to God, right? And the way that I am perceiving Bufo, and I'd love to hear your take on this, is we talked about how it is the God molecule. It is the chemical embodiment, because in order for something etherical to exist on the physical plane, it has to have a physical embodiment. And I see Bufo being the vehicle that God has chosen to embody his or its consciousness physically into, which is why when we take this medicine into our bodies, it allows us to have the chemical connection to God's consciousness. How does that?
Kind of, sort of ish. I mean, for me, it's more the understanding that the body is it plays such a small part as our even idea of who we actually are.
Yeah.
So the body is so easy and capable of healing. That's why I feel like the issue that we create around healing is really kind of more of a cause to need more healing, because we think it's so impossible sometimes. I've seen colon cancer healed by Bufo. I've seen,
wow,
you name it. I mean, anything, and so And then Bufo's in the background saying, "Oh, on a day's work." You know what I mean? It's not even that big of a.
The miracles aren't even miraculous to Bufo.
No, really, they're not. And they actually become. I mean, they're always like I said, it's always wow.
Mm-hmm.
Through my eyes, but it in spiritual time, miracles aren't so miraculous.
Yeah.
See? And so that understanding, even though it's always like, holy shit, but in that understanding, that's just how Bufo works. And so, when it comes to the body, I feel like we place it's more so of a distractor, really. Mm-hmm. So in terms of Bufo, being a chemical that gives us access to God, I don't see it like that. Although if we're going to speak in terms of chemical, it's the whatever's released in the pineal gland in the moment of death, that the same chemical makeup, etc. Mm-hmm. And yet that is what we produce in our own pineal gland. Yeah. So there's that understanding, but that I feel is just Bufo's way of relating our own understanding of where we quote unquote go. Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time keeping it within, by the bigger understanding of, divine is within you, like it's the God is definitely not a chemical, but definitely you. You see what I'm saying? So it's more so I feel like Bufo being the actual toad himself being like the physical embodiment of the toad, and then creating the medicine, and then taking the medicine. The actual act of taking the medicine is just like a ticket. Mm-hmm. It's like a ticket to have access to your true self. Yeah. To just put the storyline aside for a little while and see through to who you really are. Yeah. Because it's very much of a remembrance. If you think back to your first Bufo, you can recognize that you recognize that space. Yeah. And that is you recognizing yourself. Yeah. And so on that level, I feel like it's not so much of the chemical reaction that we would call, God, because it's also recognizable in sleep. So a lot of people will call, in the middle of the night, and they're freaking out, and they'll say, Brooke, I woke up and I'm back in Bufo, and I'll say, I forgot to tell you.
I forgot to tell you that might happen.
That might happen. And it does, it's definitely not rare, but, it does happen. And so, but all that is people will say it's a reactivation of Bufo. No, it's not. You're going into your unconscious state of being, but now you're conscious of it. Yeah. Because you had Bufo while you were conscious. You became consciously aware of your unconscious or your subconscious. Mm-hmm. So when you naturally go back into your unconscious, it's not a reactivation. That's just where you always go when you sleep. But now you recognize it. And so it wakes you up.
And I can relate to that big time.
Yeah. So I always tell people it's free Bufo, just go with it.
Just write it out.
Write it out. But yeah, so it's so in that understanding, and it's just recognizing you, and it's it's always you. It's who you always have been.
I think that's like a little bit of my nerdy side, because I like to always break things down. Like, I study herbalism, and none of it makes sense to me until I get down into the chemical aspect of what constituent of this herb is interacting with what component of the human body on a biochemical level in order to treat or remedy the imbalance or the deficiency or the overabundance of toxicity or whatever it is creating some sort of internal issue. And so my brain always likes to look at things on a very, very micro scale like that. Yeah. And so that's sort of where I'm deriving my perspective a little bit of God embodies the consciousness in the frog venom
rather than, we think of all of these different big crazy things and what God is and how God is, and it's just a little access, like a little key. We can, like you said, like a ticket. There's a substance that exists in our physical reality that.
Well, see, the ticket would be from the outside in, so the ticket is it's a ticket to get in, but the in is what you actually embody.
Yeah.
You see. And the reason we know this is because you go into Bufo, in your unconscious and in your subconscious. You're not aware that you're in Bufo, but now that you've had Bufo, now you're aware that is you.
Yeah.
Because you'll wake up in the middle of, asleep and things like that, because you recognize it as a Bufo state of being.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that understanding, the actual ticket would be the actual toad venom,
mm-hmm.
but the ticket's just giving access to you for you.
Opening the doors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically. Which,
wild.
I know, right? Because everyone always wants it to be, this all-knowingness. They want it to be outside of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's easier to accept that way sometimes.
Yeah, because then we're not really responsible for anything.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I think you got to start taking radical responsibility. Actually, Zach and I were having this conversation about addiction and from a technology perspective, but it's like you never can do anything about an addiction until you acknowledge, and you have to be incredibly honest, like, okay, I'm having this thing is controlling me. And then you can actually go into that space and do something about the addiction. So what are some things, because healing has so many different looks, right? There's so many different things we could be seeking to heal from, whether it's physical, like an addiction, whether it's emotional, psychological, or if we're just building our connection. What are some of the things that people come to this medicine for? Like that it tends to call people for?
Everything. Literally everything. From cancer, depression, addictions, like drugs, heroin. Also, so that would be all, like anything you can think of healing wise, be it physical, or, emotional. But also very much so for spiritual connection.
Mm-hmm.
The spiritual connection ones are more so my favorites, just because it allows for so much more to unfold, really as far as like information wise. But it everything that people need healing for, Bufo will work within. Like I said, I've seen it all.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't work like healing in the way people think either. A lot of it's just a change of perspective, So it's completely it's just a game changer on every level.
Isn't that what people may or may not realize healing is often the trauma is an experience or a conditioning that has put a filter over our perspective or our understanding, our energetic connection with life and the people around us. And all of the talk therapy, all of the different therapies, I think somatic therapies like breath work and things like that have more of a healing aspect than like the psychological part, because we're ultimately just developing a new perspective and shifting our awareness, which, as you said, Bufo just takes you straight to the point.
Right, exactly. So, and that's also why it's a game changer, in so many ways. But with addiction, specifically, there's the 3 consecutive ceremonies, and I was taught that through Madhu, who first taught me, but there was never really an understanding of why or how. So I never really know what to tell people on that, but I know that the 3 consecutive, for whatever reason, has by far the biggest hope as far as breaking an addiction, like, for good. So, and I've seen that, work on numerous occasions. But again, I can't tell you why.
Yeah.
I don't know why. But,
well, that was actually, so my girlfriend who invited me to sit in Bufo the first time had another friend who had a very long-standing drug problem. Daily use, like, not necessarily out of control, but probably a little bit. And she saw this person and noticed a very, very distinct change in them and was like, something's different. And that's when they said, let me tell you. And had been through the 3 ceremonies with Bufo. And then she got the information, because she and I come from the spiritual perspective of just connecting. And so that was one of the things that really made us both go, there's something to pay attention to here. After seeing that transition in the mutual friend through the drug problem. So that's something that I understand for people with addiction. It can have a huge, is it 3 ceremonies like in a day or 3 days in a row?
You can do 2 in one day, but the 3, per day. So okay. 3 days, 1 ceremony per day. If we need to go deeper in the medicine for some reason, whenever I line up consecutive medicine for breaking addiction specifically, I have the people stay here, and so in those private ceremonies, if they need to go deeper for whatever reason that day, then we do whatever it takes at that point. But yeah, so in terms of the 3 consecutive, seeing meth, broken, heroin, I mean, you name it, it's all,
That's incredible.
It is.
And one last point that I think is important to make, because I know that a lot of this, to someone listening to this conversation who maybe has not had any experience with sacred medicines personally or has no knowledge of them, this can sound pretty alarming and a little scary, overwhelming to try, like you said, trying to understand or trying to conceptualize something that you can't conceptualize. But something that I have learned and understood is that Bufo will never give you more than you can take in your experience, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, you can, so a lot of people will, go into Bufo. The medicine works in you regardless. And so that people need to be aware of that. But there's a lot of people who, with all the information that coming in, the information can be so much that the body reacts to it as trauma. Not that it's traumatic. It's just so much
kind of fearful.
Yeah, no, not really fearful. So it's like in trauma, it would be based on fear and trauma, and that's why your body shuts down and says, nope, I'm going to blank this out. With Bufo, it's just so much information. The body's like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to just blank it out.
Yeah.
Because it's so much, and so in that way, the body shuts down to any memory, of it. And so it's rare, but it happens, from time to time in the beginning, usually, for people when they first start going into Bufo, they'll, have no real recollection of it. And so,
like, that was me the first few times.
Yeah. So whenever you don't remember, that's just because the body said,
shut it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you explained that to me, that it's kind of the gift of the medicine, that it's allowing things to work through without exposing you to them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can appreciate that gift.
Right?
So.
Yeah, it's one of those, because I mean, when it comes down to it with Bufo, the consciousness of this Bufo is, older than the Ice Age. I mean, there is no other consciousness as ancient as Bufo, and so in that understanding, like, it's so beyond what we could even conceive of.
Well, it would, by nature of its existence, have
so much awareness and information just for having existed on the earth for so long.
Mhm. Yeah. So and any way you look at it, you
Yeah,
can look at
it's
it like
wild.
that, with it coming from the toad, or so again the ticket and it going
Mhm.
into the divinity of you that you are
Yeah.
as that same consciousness. So in that bigger understanding, the bigger scope, the point I'm trying to make is like the medicine will always take care of you.
Yeah.
You know, always. Like I've never had anyone regret Bufo ever.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
You know.
I totally believe that. So. Well, I'm so grateful to have been able to have this conversation with you today. It's been super fun and enlightening in so many ways. And I foresee with you that this medicine will only continue to play a bigger and bigger role in our collective desire toward healing and really ultimately finding that place of self-love. And so I'm super grateful for everything that you've shared today, because I know that when I have, sought out information, and I am that way, I eventually have to research everything, whether it's before or after. And so there's not a lot of really great, insightful information. So I'm very thankful that you shared your expertise here with us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so if there are any listeners who would like to get in touch with you to learn more, to schedule ceremony, how can they do that?
So you can either go online to our website, which is www.usntchurch.com. So I'll say that again slowly. USNT.church.com. And then my phone number is always open in public. You can call anytime. Make
And we'll
reservations
link
or
everything.
questions. Oh, cool.
Yep.
So yeah, so then she'll have my link to the number, but it's real quick, 713-657-9628. Yeah.
So if you're driving down the road and you need to dial it real quick, there you go.
There you go.
All right. And so for anyone who is interested in even just having a little bit more understanding, any questions, give Brooke a call. She's amazing. She's very generous with her time and her knowledge, and you serve this medicine in such a beautiful way, and I'm so grateful that we get to share in this experience with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching today.